Alright guys, welcome to the video and I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed making the project for this one. This is a really special video for you guys. It took a hell lot of time and effort to make, and in this one we're going to be cloning YouTube's homepage in Tailwind CSS. We're going to walk through every step of the process together, from the setup to the header to the sidebar, basically covering everything step by step, and all of that is going to be in the description below, so you guys can skip around if you'd like. And before we start, I just have a small request for all of you to just smash the like button once, because it helps with the content getting pushed to more people, and that's all I want right now for this sweet Tailwind CSS content to reach as many people as possible. So let's roll the intro to get started. Alright guys, so now let's take an overview of what we're going to make. Of course, you've all been to YouTube and you are on YouTube right now. We're going to build out this layout with the sidebar, the header, the search bar, these recommendations, and after that we'll build this recommended section. And after the recommended section, we're going to skip all of the other sections like top news and these ads and whatever there is, and we're going to straight get into the latest YouTube posts section, because this is a different kind of layout from this video card, so that we can cover as much as possible in this video. So let's get into the setup for Tailwind CSS now. Okay guys, so as for the setup, right now I have this minimal thing going for me, which is basically just an images folder with the YouTube logo, and then this basic index.html which I just created with Emmet, and then I just add this styles/style.css to it. We haven't yet made this file, and I'm serving this using live server, which is a handy VS Code extension. So right now we have this, but let's say if I say YouTube clone v1 or v2, whatever, and save this, it's automatically going to reload the browser. So what it does for you is, whenever you save a file, it automatically reloads the browser for you. It's a pretty neat and handy extension for VS Code. Definitely make sure to install it. So now to set up Tailwind CSS, I'm going to use a package manager called Yarn. You guys can choose to use npm as well, but I just seem to prefer Yarn for some reason. So let's head into a terminal and say yarn add Tailwind CSS auto prefixer and post css-cli. So we are installing these three libraries, Tailwind CSS, auto prefixer, and post css-cli, and soon you're going to see what all of these do is. Auto prefixer basically adds vendor prefixes to your code, which is like -webkit -css property or something like that, because not all browsers support all the CSS properties. So you need to add in the vendor prefixes, and auto prefixer does that for you. And what post CSS does for you is basically it processes and compiles your CSS. Whatever plugins you tell it to use, it's going to go through them in that same process and basically run the processes for you. So let's clear this up, and now we have to run a command called yarn tailwind init. What it does is it runs the init script for Tailwind CSS, and that you can find inside your node modules. And inside node modules, head into Tailwind CSS lib cli commands init.js. So there's this script inside there, and Tailwind CSS basically runs this script. Yarn basically runs this script through that process, through that command. Alright, so now let's take a peek into tailwind.config.js. It's this basic file, which is, you can see purge, theme, extend, variants, plugins. So whatever you want to add to or customize Tailwind CSS, this is your source of truth for that. You'll add that over here, and that's how the customization in Tailwind CSS works. Now we also installed post CSS, so let's set that up. I'm going to create a new file called postcss.config.js. So now this file is over here, and similar to tailwind.config, we have to add module.exports, and this is basically a JavaScript thing, ES6 modules or something. You guys can look it up, and even if you don't understand it, it's not a big deal. Just copy this along right now and eventually you will get it. So over here you have to add a plugins, which is going to be an array. First it's going to require Tailwind CSS, because it's going to process the code with that, and then it's going to require auto prefixer, which we talked about adds vendor prefixes to your code. Now you also need to have a styles folder, not necessary, but that's how I prefer it to be. And inside this styles folder, I'm going to create two files, One is going to be tailwind.css and the next one is going to be style.css. So these are basically the files that are going to control your styles. Tailwind.css needs to have these basic commands like tailwind base, tailwind, if I can type it correctly, components, and @tailwind utilities. So this is not @tailwind is of course not a general, native CSS thing. It's, as you can see, this also screams at us unknown @role @tailwind. But when you run this through post CSS CLI, it's going to automatically do the stuff for you. So now that we have this, what we can do is we need to run a command. And as you saw before, we run a command by saying yarn. So we're going to say yarn and then post CSS. Now we need to give it the name of the file which has the tailwind stuff. So styles/tailwind.css, and after -o, you need to give it the name of the output file, which is going to be styles/style.css. And now when we run this command, you guys will see the magic. Style.css is empty right now, but as soon as this command ends, it's going to have all these rule sets, and all these rule sets have been added to it through post CSS by parsing this file and then looking into Tailwind and then compiling it into this basically. Now let's take a look at our website basically. Now you see the font is also sans serif font, and the H1 doesn't have its default styling. That's just the Tailwind CSS way. And now we know we have successfully integrated Tailwind CSS into it. Now the next step that I want to do is, because every time I want to build my CSS, I don't want to run this whole command. So what I can do is, I'll copy this post CSS over till here, and then in my package.json, I can create another key which is scripts. Alright, and inside this we can define our yarn scripts, npm scripts or yarn scripts, and you say build, and inside build I can paste this in. Now let me get rid of the style.css content once, and now when you say yarn build, it's going to run that exact same script and give you the exact same effect. So every time now I don't need to type this, I can just simply type yarn build. And what we did for that is, in package.json we created a scripts object property, and inside that we had a build property which just contains the stuff for the script. Alright guys, so that's it for the setup. Now we'll move into making the header for the Tailwind for the YouTube clone. So see you in the next section. Alright guys, so now let's kickstart our development process by making the header for the YouTube homepage. So first step for making any design needs to be analyzing what we need to do exactly. And as you can see inside this, the YouTube header has two parts to it. The upper part has this logo, this search bar, and these icons, and the bottom part has these recommendation chips. And these chips are really easy to make if you've been following along in the series. We made chips in the 3rd or 4th episode. I think you guys can go ahead and check that. And some might even argue that this button should also be a part of the header, but what I'm going to do is I'll place it in the sidebar, and that way it's much more easier to lay out. Alright, so our first step in the header needs to be adding this YouTube logo. So what we can do is start off by adding the header, and inside the header there's going to be a div for the first part, and inside this, the first section is the first div is this image, and in the src we need to add images/ytlogo.png. Cool. On the alt text we can say YouTube logo. Alright, so let's check our website now, and it has this logo, but it's too huge. So we can inspect over here to see what size this logo is. Beside all this text on this tooltip, you can see there's a small 80x24 written over here, and that basically stands for width into height. So 80 pixels in width means basically 5 rem, and we can jump over to Tailwind CSS documentation, and 5 rem has the class of width 20. So let's go ahead and apply that class. So we'll add a class to this and say width hyphen 20. And for the width we can, for the height we can apply, let's say, h hyphen 12 to make it more even, to make it a little larger. Cool. It distorts the aspect ratio by a little, but it needs to be that long at least. Cool. So after we are done with the icon, our next step is to make this search bar and this button. So let's go ahead and do the markup for that. Now this is another div inside it, and here we can say input and button. Now on this input, let's first see what we have got till now. This, it's still reloading. Right now you can't see anything because the input has no border or background, but when I click over here you can see there's this focus outline ring, but we need it to be on the same line as the logo for the header. So what we can do is, first of all, I'll give this button some text for now and later add in the logo. What we can do is, for this whole container, for the upper part of the header, we can add a class of flex and say justify hyphen between items center. So this just means display flex and justify content space between and items align center. Alright, so let's see what we've got now. Cool. These are at opposite ends because right now it's space between. Just so that it aids in a development process, we can say justify around for now, and we'll change it to space between later on when we add in the third section. So okay, so now on to styling the input. First we need to give it a placeholder search, and then some class for the border, and then bg gray 400. Let's see. Alright, so I messed up. It didn't have to be bg gray 400 but border gray 400. It was a quick typo. Yep. And now onto the button. For the button we need to give it a class of, let's say, bg gray 200, because as you can see this button has a light gray background. Okay, so now what we can do is, to add in the icon, I'm going to use material icons, and I've opened up the documentation for materialized CSS because it gives us a really nice idea on how to use the material icons. Just a second. Yep. So we can grab this link directly and put it in the head portion of our app. And now to add in any icon from the material icon library, we just have to say i.material icons, like an I tag with the class of material icons, and inside this I tag we have to give the name of the icon we need. So our icon is named search, and there it gives us a search button. Cool. Now to like style this better, we can say to center the icon, item center, justify center. Alright, and now jump to the next line because it doesn't have enough space over there. So to bring them in the same line, we can again say class flex, item center, justify center. Take notice that this flex classes are going on the div wrapper that wraps input and button. Cool, they're in the same line now. Now let's see what height these have. So this has a height of 26. This also has a height of, this has a height of 32. Yes, 32 might be it. And let's go over to the height in the documentation of Tailwind CSS. So 32 is basically 2 rem. So 32 pixels is 2 rems, and that is h8. So we can apply the class of h8 to both our button and this input, h-8 and h-8. Yeah, they're better sized now. Now what we can do is, on the search we basically need to add in a bunch of classes. First one is padding, px1, py2, Alright, that was the wrong element. Sorry, I put them on the button, but that needs to go on the input. Alright, so it has more padding now, and right now as you can see, when I click on it, it has this focus ring all around. So to remove this ring, all we need to do is focus semicolon outline none, if I can type correctly. Yeah. So what YouTube does is, on focus, it doesn't have an outline ring, but it has this, once again it's lagging. Yeah, but it has this dark blue border all around. So by default we have a border gray of 200, but border gray of 400, but on focus we can say border blue 600, let's say. Yeah, and that gives us the desired effect. Now we can, size the button properly as well. I'm guessing this has some fixed width. Its fixed width is 65 pixels. We can approx that to 64, and 64 by 16 is 4, so 4 rem. We need a width of 4 rem, and we can look over here. 4 rem corresponds to H16, so we can do that for width as well. So to this button I'll give a fixed width of width 16. Cool, that's looking more like it. And now we need to add a border to the button as well, same color as the input. Yeah, and now I'm going to zoom in to show you guys something. This border is overlapping for the button and the input. So there's a class in Tailwind CSS that can help us say that remove the border on the left side of the button. So we can say border -L-0, and that is going to remove the border on the left side of the button and save us from that overlapping. And also, as you can see over here, I have to turn off the inspector. On hover, there's a darker color to it. So we can say hover BG gray 300. Yeah, that has the desired effect. Let's zoom out. Cool. Now, another thing that you might notice is YouTube, as its general background, has a light gray color, and only the sidebar and the header are white. So on the body, we can say class -bg gray, let's say 100, and on the header we can say class bg white. Yep, the effects there. Now let's see if the header has a fixed height as well. Alright, so it is 56 pixels tall. So we can do the math. 56 by 16 is 3.5 rem, and 3.5 rem, we don't have it in our scale. So now this is a use case where we can extend Tailwind CSS. As you can see, by default there's a class h12 for 3 rem, and then there's a class h16 for 4 rem. There's no class for 3.5 rem. So what we can do is, as I told you guys before, using tailwind.config.js, we can extend our spacing scale as well. So in this extend object, I can open it up and add another key, let's say spacing, and make this an object as well. And now we can define our own spacing unit. So I want it to be 14, and I want it to correspond to 3.5 rem. As you guys can notice in the documentation, there's a pattern to this. Every 2 units of Tailwind CSS classes are corresponding to 0.5 rem. So if h12 gave me 3 rem, it makes total sense for h14 to be 3.5 rem. So now that I have declared 14 over here, I can go into my code, and basically on this div I can say h-14. But let's see, this would give us no effect right now. That is because after we add values to tailwind.config.js, we need to build our CSS again. So we need to go into a console and say yarn build. And once our CSS is built again, then we can go ahead and use this class. We have already used this class, but this class will take effect when our CSS is built. And now it is. Clear this up, close it down. And now you see our header is a little bit taller. So this is how you can add your custom spacing or whatever to Tailwind CSS. So now that we have that sorted, now let's add this section, the icon section basically, and this avatar sort of. So for this we need another div. Alright, so inside this div you're going to have another section, and we need three icons and one avatar. So first let's do these three icons. So it's going to be a button, icon button into 3. Alright, that messed up. Never mind. Button into I. Oh god, the spacing is messed up. Yep. And similar to the search icon before, we can give them a class of material icons, and then we only need to specify what icon do we need. So for this icon we can look in the materialize CSS space, and over here let's say I'll do a search for video or something, and this way we have to look for our icons. Yeah, so this icon is called video call. We just need to paste in this text inside our icon to get this icon. And now let's see the magic. We have this icon over here. Cool. Now similar to this icon we need 2 more. This one is called notifications. Let's see what this one is called. I'm going to copy this over and let's say apps. Not sure if that is going to work, if that is the right icon name. And notifications. Yep, now we have the 3 icons, and to build this one, we can just say button div. Right, for now I'm going to make this a div, and later on we can also switch it out for an image, let's say, because it is an image. But right now I'm just going to give it a h6 w6, let's say, rounded full. So what rounded full does is it gives it a border radius of 999 pixels or something like that, and give it a bg so that we can see if it's circle or not. Alright, so that seems to be small compared to the avatar. We can peek into this and see its size. It's 32 into 32 pixels. So 32 pixels is 2 rems, and 2 rems are h8 and w8 instead of 6. So we just need to say 8, 8. And as you can imagine, when it's a square, because it has the same height and width, and we say rounded full, it's going to turn into a circle, which it did over here. Yep, and now it's a circle. And to align these properly, we can simply go ahead and say flex item center, justify center. Cool. And now we need to add this flex to each of these buttons as well, so that we align the icon properly. And now we need to increase the spacing between them. Rather than giving each one of them a margin, I can simply go ahead and say space x hyphen, let's say 4. This is just going to increase the spacing between them in the x axis. So now that we have that, instead of saying justify around, we can say justify between, which is the desired behavior. And these are stretching a lot to the outside, right? So we need to add some margin to it. Now let's peep into this and it has some kind of padding or margin. Let's figure out what amount. So we can peek in over here. It has 16 pixels of padding on the left and right. 16 pixels is 1 rem, which is 4 in the Tailwind scale. So we can say mx14, mx not 14, 4, and go back to this, and now it has that padding as well, margin, sorry. Now our only issue is this search bar is not as large as it should be, because now if we open up the dev tools and just turn on the flex on this, we can see how this space is being allotted, that this area has this much space, then this has this much space, this has this much space. Now what it's doing is it's containing this middle flex item to just the amount of space that it has right now, and I don't want to give it a fixed width. So what we want is for this item to grow. So what we can do is, on this div that has the input and the button, we can say flex hyphen grow. Yep. Now it didn't show any effect, but when you inspect it, when I turn on the flex box, the middle item is taking as much space as possible. Now if I give the a width full, if I say to the input that's go for the width full, then let's see what it gives us. Now our search bar is too long, so we want there to be some space. We don't want it to be this long. So in the width, in the documentation, let me just show you guys the percentages. In Tailwind CSS, you can also define widths in fractions like this, like 1 by 5, 2 by 5, 3 by 5, 4 by 5. And when I was playing around with this, I realized that width 60%, which is width 3 by 5, works the best for this. So let's head over to this and give our input, rather than a width of full, a width of 3 by 5, which is just 60%. And here it is, our layout is more or less sorted. Yeah. Alright, so I'm going to turn off the flex and turn off the inspector. Now that the top part of our layout is sorted, what we can do is work on the bottom part, which are these recommendations, right? So for this recommendations, we'll create another div inside the header. Alright, and obviously we're going to say class flex items hyphen center, justify center. I don't think we need to go for justify center, that's alright. We can go for a bit padding on the sides, px2, alright. So now we'll define our first chip. This is to be called all recommendations, and let's see what it gives us right now. And as you might notice, there's a divider between these sections as well. We can add that really simply with Tailwind CSS. On the header, we need to say divide y. What it will do is it will add a divider on the y-axis between each of these its direct child elements. And now we have that divider as well. Now let's figure out how to make this chip. So first instinct is that it has to have a class of text sm. It has to be smaller, so text hyphen sm, and then it has to have a bg gray 700. It has to have a border, and its color has to be border gray 800. So let's see what that gives us. Now it has given us a rectangular shape, but now if I say rounded hyphen full, it gives us the chip. Now all we need to do is add a bit of padding, px hyphen 1, and let's see if there's padding on the y axis too. Yes, there is, px hyphen 1, py hyphen 1, and let's give it a text gray 200. Cool, looks nice. Yep, I guess it has a bit more padding on the x-axis in the YouTube design. Alright, looks great now. So this also has to have some margin on the top and bottom, this area. So what they've done is they don't have any margin on this area, they have margins on each of the chip, it seems like. Yeah, so let's figure out what the margin is. We can, once we have selected this element, we can dive into its CSS over here and figure that out. It doesn't have a margin, but it has a padding. Okay, it has a padding on the left and right, and then it has a margin on, it has a margin of 12 pixels. And this I know because when you select an element, you can dive into the CSS rule set for it. So margin 12 is 0.75 rem, which again we do have. So we can say mt3 on it, or we can say my3 on the whole div itself. Alright, for that, for some reason that did not work at all. Let's see the documentation for margin. Yeah, so M3 should have worked, but for some reason it did not. Margin Y3, so let's instead try PY-3. Yeah, now that has given us how we wanted it to be. We can add some padding on the x-axis, px-2, let's say, or 4. Alright, and now we need to add more chips like these. Alright, I added too many, I just needed one more. I don't know why I added so many. And instead of saying BG gray 700, we can say BG gray 200, border gray 300, and text gray 800. And that gives us the light colored chip. Now this has to be some topic. Let's say TailwindCSS. And when I was inspecting this, I saw there's a slight inset shadow on all of these. So we can add that as well. We can say shadow hyphen inset to both of these. Yep. It makes a really subtle difference. Alright, and then to add space between them, like we did before, we can use space x3. And now I can add a bunch of chips. I don't know why the formatting is being messed up when I'm copying them over. Some issue. Never mind. I'll just do Shift Alt 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 Alt. I'm not going to spend the time of changing up their text. I don't care about that right now. Yep. So now you take a look, our header looks almost the same as YouTube's header. Just the thing that's missing are these arrows of next, like left and right arrows, and I'm not going to spend time on those. Those can be something that you implement on your own as a challenge. So let's see. Alright, the last thing that I want to do for this right now is for the header. Right now this is using just the system font, because that's what TailwindCSS does. It forces the website to use the system font. But to add a font of your own, because YouTube uses a font called Roboto. Most of Google's product use that font. So first of all, we're going to have to import that font, and for that I'm going to use Google Fonts. So I'm going to select this style for 400 and bold as well. and then we can click on embed, and I can click on import and get the import statement for this. Cool. Now we don't need that. And in my styles, in my tailwind.css, I can come over here and paste in this import statement. And now in the tailwind.config.js, like we did with the spacing, we can extend our font family as well. So I can say font family, make this an object, add a comma, then I can define a custom font. So I want it to be Roboto, and then in an array we can define the set of fonts that we want. So the first preference should go to Roboto, and if it's not loaded, it should go to Arial, let's say, and then it should finally go to sans serif. Yeah, and now obviously because we updated our tailwind.config.js, we need to build our CSS again, and that's building. Once that's done, which it is, we can go on to our index, and on the body tag I can add a font hyphen Roboto, because we defined Roboto in our font family. So this should take effect and change the font to Roboto. I guess it did. We can check in the inspector, and now in the font section it says Roboto. So now we have successfully integrated a custom font into this as well. In the next section, we're going to see how to implement the header, how to implement the sidebar, and to how to accommodate the shifting of the header on the side. Because right now our header is spanning the full size, but when we add the sidebar, we're going to have to accommodate that our header is shifted a bit. So see you in the next section, guys. Okay, so now that we're done with the header, let's take a look. So this looks like this. Now let's go on to the sidebar. So for the sidebar, again, to measure the dimensions for the sidebar, we can open up the dev tools and click on the inspector right here. So it shows us a little number. It says 72 into 336. So it's 72 pixels wide. And I got to close up the inspector. 72 by 16. It's 4.5 rem. And let's see if we have a width of 4.5 rem in Tailwind CSS. Okay, so as you can see over here, we have width 4 rem and then width 5 rem. So as we did before for the spacing unit of 14, we're going to have to define a spacing unit called 18 and set it to 4.5 rem. So we'll jump over to tailwind.config.js, and similar to 14, we need an 18, and it's going to be 4.5 rem. Now that we have updated it, we have to build our CSS again. Cool. That will get done in about a few seconds. Until then, we can get started on our sidebar. So to make it so that our sidebar stays fixed over here, we need to make it a position of fixed. So let's create a side. I'll call it a side, and give it a position of fixed, and give it a width of 18, height of h screen, which just says height is equal to 100 viewport height, 100 vh, and bg hyphen white. Let's see if that gives us something. Alright, so we have this sidebar over here, but it's below the header. So to place the header correctly, as we have the width 18 over here, on the header we can simply go and say margin left 18, and now that's sized correctly. But no, you see there's this space over here, the empty area. We have to somehow figure out how to cover that area as well with the sidebar. So on this, because we have given it a fixed, we can give it a position. So we're going to say top hyphen 0, which is going to set its top to 0, and now it spans the whole height, sorry. Alright, so now that we have our sidebar in position, what we need to do is add in this icon. Now let's see what this icon is called, menu or something. So yeah, it's called menu, exactly, obviously. So our first one is this button, I dot material icons menu. Yep, so that should give us a menu icon over here. Yep, and it's positioned incorrectly. So now to position it correctly, first of all we need flex on the sidebar, and let's say item center, because everything is going to be centered, and flex hyphen col, standing for flex column. Yep, and now it needs padding on the top, and as you can see, this icon is aligned with the photo, so we need to put in as much padding as the header. So let's just scroll up and see how much padding did we give to the header. It doesn't have any padding but an mx of 4. So in the aside we can say empty margin top hyphen 4. Yep, and that places it correctly. Cool. Now after that icon, we need to have these kind of buttons that basically spanning full width of the sidebar. So let's get to making the first one. I'm going to make this another div altogether, and this is going to have a button which has an eye of material icons and home. Cool. So let's see. Yep, now we have that, and I can just increase the width on this button so that that icon is pushed down below. Okay, no, rather we can add some margin on the top for this div. Class margin top 10. 10 is too much. How about 6? Yep. And inside this button we need to have some text as well. So let's say span, not spam, span dot text access, and let's say home. Cool, that gives us that. Now we will make this button a flex container and say item center justify center flex col. Yep. And we also need to give it a bg hover. So hover colon bg gray 100. So right now, as you see, when I'm hovering over it, the button, the BG is just on this width. So what we can do is make this whole div of width full, and then make this button of width full, and BG gray 200 rather than 1. And now you see this has this hover color over it, and we need to add a lot of padding on the x-axis. px4. Oh, sorry, it has to be py, not on the x-axis, on the top and bottom, that's the y-axis. And now you see it's more or less similar to this button. But the thing is, this button, the selected one, needs to have a text red as well, but we'll take care of that in a second. First, let's copy this over 4 times. We have 4 buttons, right? Yeah. So we copy that over 4 times, and on the first one we can say text hyphen red hyphen 600. On the whole side we can say text hyphen gray 700. So for anything that the text color is not specified, it's going to use gray 700. Yeah. And now we need to find these icons and add in this text trending subscriptions library. So trending subscriptions library. Cool. The only thing that's left is to find the correct icons, and because that is a tedious task, I'll just pause for a second. I'll cut this part out and just look for the correct icon names. Alright, so I did some digging and I found the icon names for all of these. I hope I remember them. So for the trending one, it says local underscore fire underscore department. Yeah, I know, weird. That's what it is. And for subscriptions, it's called subscription itself. Subscriptions. And then the last icon for the library is called video underscore library. Let's take a look. Yeah, and that has given us the correct icons. And I see that the text is much smaller in YouTube for these labels, but text XS is basically the smallest text that Tailwind CSS has by default. We can extend this to be we can extend the typography scale to add a smaller text size, and I'll leave that for later for finishing touches. Not that important right now. And also, if you see, these icons are also larger in comparison to the YouTube icons. So for that we have a quick fix. Just we need to add small to the class list of these icons. Small. I'll copy this over. Yep. And basically that's it. That's all that we needed for the sidebar. You can see it's pretty similar. And another thing, okay, so the last thing that I notice is the YouTube icon is much closer to the sidebar in the actual YouTube website. So we can achieve that using negative margin. So I'll go over to the div that has the YouTube icon. It's right over here. And to this we can say minus ml3. So it's going to apply a negative margin of 0.75 rem, and that looks more accurate, right? Yep. Okay. And another thing, that this top bar, the header has a border bottom as well. So we can simply add the class of border B and be done with it. Also to your body you can add a class of anti-aliased, which just improves the font smoothing. Yep, that's more like it, that's more accurate. Alright guys, so now that we are done with the sidebar, the next part that we are going to focus on is this main area and this recommended section, and then building out these video guards. So see you guys in the next section. Alright guys, so now that we have this much built, we are going to move over to the main section, which is basically this recommended section with the 4-column grid. So what we're going to do is first just implement one card and then replicate that in a grid. So let's get to it. Now below the aside and whatever the heck we have, we are going to define a main section, and inside this it's going to have a div. Alright, and first we'll have an h1 is too big semantically, h3 that says recommended, and this has to be class font Excel, and let's see what we got. Font Excel and font bold. Now as you can see, this is getting hidden behind the sidebar because sidebar has a position of fixed. It's going to stay over here. So what we need to do is give some padding, sorry, margin on the left side. Yep. Now that that's sorted, I think we need some more padding. Yeah, of course we need more padding. Let's take a look. I guess 20 should work fine. Let's go for 24. All right, and for padding top, we can say, let's say 18. 18 is too much. 12. 12 is again too much. 8. Yeah, that should give us the right recommended section. And even when I said text Excel, that isn't changing the size by a lot. Yeah, sorry, it isn't font Excel, it's text Excel. My bad. All right, after this we're going to have a div for the grid and div for each item. So we have to define each item now. Now first let's inspect it a bit and get to know our dimensions well. This is getting quite irritating, the amount of flag it has. Alright, so we can see the width of the image is the width of the whole card basically, and yeah, that's 274. So we can go ahead and try 274 by 16. That gives us 17.125 of width. We can head over to width and see if we have something like that. 17.125 rem. That's a lot. Okay, so the highest we have is width 64, that is of 16 rem, and every 2 units basically stand for 1 rem. So width 66 would be 17 rem and width 68 would be 18 rem. I guess we can go for width 68, which is 18 rem. And then what's the height for this image? It's 154 by 16, 9.625, and again we don't have 9.5, so we're going to have to define our own class. It would be 38, which would be 9.5. Anyway, let's get to tailwind.config.js, and first we have to say 68, which would be 16 rem. And now I gotta think what we need to do for the height. Height is 9.625 rem, right? So it should be, we can give it width 38, 9 rem, or let's say width 39. Anyway, let's try height 40 as it is and then decide for the image. Anyway, so we'll give this whole div a class of width 68. And one thing we forgot, we have changed our config, so we need to build our CSS again. While that happens, inside our div of width 68, we are defining a div for the image. Right now this is going to be just a black box. Later on we'll add on an image over here. H40 width full, BG gray 700, not 7000. So let's see what that gives us. Yeah, that seems to be the right size for a thumbnail, right? Yeah. And on this div we can add a bit of margin top 4. Yeah, and now let's define make the rest of the card. for this avatar, we have 36. 36 is how many rems? 36 is 36 by 16. That is 2.25. Again, we don't have 2.25. The closest that we have is 2.5. That is with 10. We'll use that. Alright. So after the image, this has to be a flex container, because as you can see, these and these are side by side. So that needs to be a flex container. So we'll say class flex. That's it. And this would be a div of h-10, w-10. And right now, instead of the avatar photo, I'm just going to give it a background like we've been doing. And to this div, we need to say empty2 and rounded full. Cool. It's at the right position now. After that, we have this text. We need to figure out if it is text SM or if it's the normal size. So dig into rules, or let's say computed. It says font size 14 pixels. So, and for this, it says font size 10 pixel. So this is text SM, this is text XS. So let's go ahead and make it like that. Now there's this other div container in the flex. First is dot text SM, which is basically the title of the video. So let's say 4 letters of lorem. Isn't coming out right now. This needs to have a div, a margin left of, let's say 2, text SM, font bold. I guess text SM is too small for this. We can leave it at normal right now and figure it out later on. Let's go over to text sizing. Yeah, font size, class reference. Alright, so text XS is 0.75 rem, and we can figure out 0.75 into 16, it's 12 pixel. That is XS, and SM is 0.875 into 16, that is 14. Even though we're using the same sizes, it just visually looks wrong to me somehow. I don't know, never mind. We'll make this a larger lorem ipsum then. Let's say lorem 7. Alright, 7. Alright, we are already running into this issue that our div is shrinking into a pill rather than a circle. So to stop that, what we can do is we need to add a class of flex-shrink-0, which will ensure that our div doesn't shrink down. Like we used flex grow on the search bar section. Basically, we said flex grow as much as possible. We are hitting over here flex shrink 0, which means don't shrink at all. Alright, and after this, we have another div, and let's see what data do we have over there. Okay, so first of all, we have the channel name. That is, we can put in anything. I'll just put in channel name over there. Channel name. And then we have this 97k views 8 hours ago. Cool. So I'll make this into a paragraph. Command X. this is its own paragraph, then this will be its own paragraph, which is basically let's say 9 hours ago, and then for that bullet that we saw in between, it says and me dot, it's a HTML entity, look it up, and then let's say 87k views. Let's see how that looks. Alright, now a couple of things that we need to do is, on this div we'll add a class of text XS and font gray 700. I have a feeling that 700 is going to be too light. Alright, it is too light, so font gray 600. Still not. Alright, because I'm doing this wrong. It isn't font gray, it's text. I somehow managed to mess up. It's alright. And instead of text gray 500, we need text gray 700. Alright, that's too dark. The song and dance of choosing the colors is insane. Yep, looks correct, looks right. And now what we can do is just copy this all over, and let's see if we take off text XS, is this still looking good enough at the same font size? No, it definitely needs text XS. Yep. Okay, now let's just replicate this card a few times so that we can make a grid out of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now we have 8 cards, and as you can see in the recommended section there are 8 cards, and it has 4 columns, so basically 2 rows and 4 columns. What we can do is, on the parent container for this div, this one basically that has all the cards inside, we can say grid. It's similar to flex, it just says display grid, and then grid template calls 4, and I'm pretty sure that this is not the class because this is not going to work. We can cross-reference in the documentation what the correct class name is. So grid template columns. Yeah, so we have to take off the template, it's just grid calls and the number. Yeah, and now we have that layout, and we have one extra card. I'll get rid of that. Alright, now so it should be just 4 cards, and they have some space in between, but they have no space column row wise. So what we can simply do is, on this we can say, let's say gap is equal to 6 or 7, whatever. Yeah, and let's look at the actual YouTube. So the actual YouTube layout has really less gap in the columns and a huge gap in the cards, in the rows. So instead of defining gap like this for both rows and column, we can say, let's say row gap is 10 and col gap is 4. You can control the gap like that. Yeah, and that is much better. And I think we should go for a lesser gap on the column. Never mind. We will have to increase the width to accommodate for a lesser gap. So I guess that's it for this section, and in the next section we're going to make a posts layout like this one. We're going to cover this section, latest YouTube posts. Before ending this section, we can let's go ahead and add the padding on the bottom and that border that this section is supposed to have. If I can find the right markup. Yep. So this is the recommended section, and we can say class border -b -4 and then define a color for it. Now it has a border, but it has no padding on the bottom, so you can't see anything. Padding bottom, let's say 12. Yeah, that should be fine. Yep. Now it has this border on the bottom, and when we add in more content for the latest YouTube post section, then you'll see that it's there. It's just not that visible to us right now. Alright guys, so that's it for this section, and in the next section, as I mentioned, we'll see how to make those post layout. Okay guys, so now we have this much built, and you might be doubting a bit right now that the UI doesn't look that appealing, because instead of pictures we have just dark blue or dark gray boxes, and when in the end we swap out those boxes, those colors, for actual pictures, you'll see how the UI will shape up to its own. Alright, so now we have this main section implemented, and the next step is to implement the posts section, which is right over here. Let me turn down the inspector. Yeah. So first step for this has to be just adding the heading and the basic stuff. So we have this, sorry, I misspelled it, div, yeah, and then we can just copy over the markup that we had for recommended. Oh god, cool. And this div is going to have some margin top for cool. And now inside this we'll have a div for the post grid, and then we will have another div for each card. Now first we need to see what are the dimensions of the card basically. So it seems to be 370 pixels wide, and if we do the math, 370 by 16 is 23.125, and we don't have anything like that in our width. Our maximum width is 16 rem, right? So to get to 23.125 rem, we can, I guess, do with 23 rem as well, and to find out three rem. Cool. And now we need to build a CSS again, because we need to do that every time we change our tailwind.config.js. Now to this card I can give a class of width 92 and bg white, postcard or whatever. Don't want to give it a height right now, and let's see what it gives us. Yep, we have this wide of a card over here. Now let's figure out the height for this card. Yeah, so 210. So for that we can say 210 by 16, 7.875. So I guess we can go with 8 rem, and we have 8 rem as W32, so it's 32. We can put that as height. We can say height 32, and let's see what that gives us. Yeah, we have a card wide enough, high enough. Maybe we can increase the spacing to width to height 40 as well. And instead of MT, we can say MY, so we have some space on the bottom as well. Yep. And I still think this card is not high enough, but once we get into the text, into implementing it, we can always tweak the height. Alright, so now on to the content. Our first row is basically just this, and I can see this, the whole card will be a flex container with the flex direction of column, and then every column, every row is also going to be a flex container basically. So let's get started with this. Sorry about that. All right. So this div is already going to be a flex container, and our first row is also going to be a flex container for items center. I think that's a bit excessive. Nah, we need it. Cool. And now we can div with width, let's say, so we need 24 pixels, so that's 16, that's 1.5, so into 4, that's 6. So we need to give it a div of width of 6 and a height of 6 and a bg hyphen blue hyphen 300. All right, and we have to say rounded hyphen full. After this div comes the channel name, and then comes the dot in between, and then comes the times. All right, so after this comes the channel name, that is another p tag, cal halden, or let's just say lorem ipsum, and we have to add a dot, and then let's say 6 hours ago, and this has to be text XS and text gray 600, and it has to have some margin, so margin left 2. Cool. This will go on the top of the card finally when we are all done, but yeah, this seems similar, but just one problem: the text seems to be larger in the main UI. So I'm just trying to find the font size for this. It says font size 13 pixels, so that's more of a text SM than text XS. Yep. And now that's too large. Again, never mind, we'll fix the typography if we have the time at the end. Cool, so this was our first flex container. We are done with the topmost part. Then comes this part, which is half image. No, let's say, let's define a proper width and height for our image. It's going to take up this much space. It's going to be flex string 0, and the rest of the space this content will take up. If we wanted to, we could do that with grid as well, but all right, we're going with flexbox, so flexbox it is. 116, so 116 is by 16, 7.25 into 4, it has to be around 30 in terms of tailwind spacing. So we can use width 32 and height 32 for the image. Okay, so first we'll make it flex. Yeah, and then our first container is going to be lorem 30, and then we're going to have a div of width 32 dot height 32 dot bg gray 600. All right, so that messed up big time because On our main flex, the whole card, we have to add flex hyphen col to say it's a column, and the text doesn't need to be this big, it has to be lorem 10, and let's say class text sm itself text sm is still too small, then let's just leave it as it is, no text. And on this, because the div is getting shrunk down, it's not a square, we have to add flex shrink 0. Yeah, that's more like it. And then on this whole, we'll add a margin top of 3. And on the whole card as well, we need to add, let's say, a padding x of 3 and padding y of 1. And instead of recommended, this has to say latest YouTube posts. Latest YouTube posts. Alright, let's see now. Yeah, that's more like it. And this card also has a border. So border gray 600. Is too dark. 400, and for now I'm going to leave the height as empty because the text is overflowing, and this needs to have a margin top of 2, let's say. Yeah, that's more like it. Cool. So now on to our next step. The last step is basically adding this section. This is again going to be a flex container of itself. It's a lot of flexes and a lot of nested flex containers. So this is the div for our card, and then again this is going to be div class flex items center justify between. Our first div is going to be that thumbs up area, so again we need to look for those icon. Sorry, just a little snafu. So let's say thumbs. Okay, so thumbs underscore down and thumbs underscore up. First is going to be thumbs underscore up, then down. Alright, so it's going to be a button that has an I dot material icons, and then thumbs underscore up. We'll copy this over and thumbs underscore down. These are our two icons, and in between them will be a div for, let's say, 170. This is the 179, that's the likes. Alright, for some reason we can't see our icons at all, so it is thumb underscore up and thumb underscore down. I have an extra S over here, so I'll get rid of that. Cool. And this whole div needs text sm font, sorry, text gray 600. Alright, let's see how that looks now. Yep, so we need to give it a flex as well, flex, and on this icons we need to add a class of small. So let's say small. Cool. Now they're right beside each other. We need to give it a space. So we will say space x1. Oh, rather than doing this, we'll just give individual margins. So margin left 1, and on this button we're going to have margin left -2, because as you can see in YouTube's UI, the likes counter is much more near to the thumbs up button than the thumbs down button. Cool. Now that we have that, we also need to give it a little bit of margin top 2, or let's say margin top 3. Yep. Now we're done with the first div. Now comes the next div, and over here also we need to make it item center, and this div also needs to be flex items center. And our first thing for that div is supposed to be this comments icon. Now we need to look for this icon, comment. It's called comment. That was easy. So button -I material icons dot small and comment. Yep. So now that we have that, let's take a look. Yep, it's on this edge. Now another div with a little bit of margin, class ml1. Now this is the comment counter. Let's say 24. Okay, and we need to have item center justify center as well, I guess. I don't think we need that, but never mind, we'll fix that later on. The text is not that well aligned. Alright, so now we need our last icon in there, I dot material icons dot small. Now I just need to find the name for that icon. Now what could those 3 dots be called? Let's search for dots. Nothing. 3 as well, nothing. Menu. Okay, it's not called that as well. So okay, so it's called more_vert. Nice name. That was sarcasm, by the way. Alright, so we have that, and we need to add some margin on this button. Class margin left 2, margin left 3. Yeah, that's more accurate. And let's see why our text is not being aligned properly. We need to investigate that. Okay, so this is a flex container, items center. I guess it would be better if I did items start, maybe. Yeah, that's much more better aligned. Still not how we want it to be, but alright, it's much better than normal. So guys, I guess that's it for the individual post. It looks pretty similar, right? So maybe I think the width is a little less. So we have a width of 92, and that is 23 rem. Let's try 94 and 24 rem. Where is the width? Yeah, instead of 92 we're going for 94, and since we changed our tailwind.config, we need to build our CSS again, which is going to happen in a second. uh, and as soon as that happens, it will take proper effect. Alright, something's wrong. I broke something or the other. This still hasn't completed, it seems. Yeah, it took too long this time. Yep, that's alright, that's fine. Alright guys, so what seems to be the next step is to translate this over into a grid like we did the videos. So we copy over this whole div, this one. Yep. Alright, I have 3 posts. Let's verify. Yep. And now we need to put them in a grid. So on this, not on this one, on this one, we have to say grid and then grid hyphen calls hyphen 3 because we need 3 columns, and then gap is 6. Okay, nothing happened. That's a little weird. Let's investigate. Okay, so we have this main, and inside this main, this section. Yep. Alright, so this has to be in a grid, but somehow it isn't. The grid is showing up. Alright, so okay, I made a mistake. These all, hopefully I'm picking the right div, or we can just get rid of this markup at least. Alright, sorry for the mess, just give me a second. While pasting over more of the cards, I had made a mistake. So this is the card that we need, and rest all we can delete. Yep. And just beside this card, we need more cards. Yep, it should work fine now. Sorry for the confusion earlier. And there seems to be an issue that the width is too large and it's bleeding out. So we have this vertical scroll. Either we can try reducing the width or reducing the gap. So let's just drop the width down to 92 itself when it was working fine. That will be 23 rem. And again we need to build our CSS. While that happens, we'll fix it in our code. So we had a width 94. Yep, there it is. We just need to change it to 92. Cool. And as soon as the code CSS compiles, we can see your effect. Yeah, and now that's fine. Cool. And I think it needs a little more padding on the y-axis. It's too less right now. For every card, I'm going to have to change that. py2, py2, py2. All right. So now let's take a look. Yeah, that's more like it. And now what I'm going to do is I'll just pause the video for a while and swap in the images so that you guys can see this UI in full effect, because all of our markup and Tailwind CSS stuff is done, believe me or not. All that stuff is done. We just need to switch out the images. I'll find some images and show you how to switch out one of them and then do the rest of them beside a cut. Okay guys, so I got lazy and I just pasted the same picture of the man and then the same picture of the airplane and then the same picture of the coffee over and over again, because just going on Unsplash and just looking for nice photos and pasting in the URL was too much work and I'm too lazy for that. You guys can go ahead and change up the images if you'd like, because I'm going to put up the code on GitHub and you all can take a look. The link to it is going to be in the description. So there are some touches that we forgot to take care of early on, and I'm just going to go over them now. So like in YouTube, you might notice that the content flows under the header. The header is on the top, and it also has a BG opacity because below it I can see the content. And right now if we scroll, our header goes with us. So we can fix that quite easily. On the header, we need to give it a position of fixed like we did with the sidebar. So on the header, we say fixed, and then we say inset -x-0. This just inset x-0 just says that left and right should be 0, and it's on top by default, so that should work out for us. And on the main section, so yeah, on the main section we have a padding top of 8, but now what will happen is our header will clash with the main content. It's going to overlap it. So rather we can increase this padding to 32, and on our header we can increase the BG opacity as well, as we saw in the YouTube demo. BG opacity to 75, sorry, reduce the BG opacity to 75. Alright, I guess that's all we needed to do. Yep. And now the header is right there, and below this you can see the content as well. I guess the opacity doesn't look nice, we can get rid of it. Alright, another thing that I added shadow inner early on, shadow inset early on to add an inset shadow to these chips. But in fact, the class name that TailwindCSS uses is shadow inner, not inset. So I'm going to fix that. Just search and replace shadow inset and then replace it with shadow inner. Yeah, that should pretty much solve it. So let's get back to that. Yeah, and now as you can see, these chips have a slight inset shadow in them. Alright, and the last thing that I want to do is when I'm just moving over this section, I'm able to select this text, and I don't think that's nice UX. I can just disable this selection by simply saying select -none on their parent container. This disables user select on this area. So now if I try to select it, I'm not able to. Okay guys, so I think that's pretty much done with the this project, and there are little touches that I left out, like changing color on hover for these chips or these icons over here that we should have done, but I left them out. You guys can go ahead and extend this project, put in those nice touches, make it more polished. I guess it's 95% there, not 100 but 95% similar to YouTube, and a whole lot of effort went into this. Just 5-6 hours went into making this project, and then now it's been 5-6 hours today for me while I'm recording this video. A lot of retakes and recording them in sections, and it's going to take a lot of time to edit this as well. And I know this video might have been a lot rough around the edges because it's my first time recording a tutorial of this complexity and of this length. So I hope you guys forgive me for that, and if you liked it, just let me know in the comments and drop a like. It's really going to be really helpful. Also, for more content like this, obviously I have amazing content, so you have to subscribe to my channel. Alright guys, see you in the next tutorial.